looking for political correctness, you've come to the wrong place. It's Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, 103.9 LI News Radio.
Good afternoon, Long Island. Welcome to Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. This is Steve Levy, the former county executive in Suffolk County. We welcome you to the show. 2 hours of live call-in. You may enjoy listening to talk radio. Many of the nationally syndicated guys, they're very, very interesting, but it's hard to get on that show. If you want to participate in our conversation, though, we're right here broadcasting out of MacArthur Airport, and we welcome your thoughts. We're at 631-451-1039. The 1039 is the same as our radio tag here at Long Island News Radio, 103.9 FM. We got a show that's quite diverse today. In the second segment, we're going to have former Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rich Dormer on to talk about fighting crime. And thereafter, the last hour is going to be some fireworks, folks. We have a representative from one of the first Tea Party groups, Steve Flanagan from the Conservative Society for Action, who'll be here in the same studio with Roger Clayman, who's one of the top dogs over at the Nassau-Suffolk AFL-CIO union. So we're going to be talking about things from the DREAM Act that it went down in flames this past week up in Albany, though it could be resurrected. The tax cap, is it working or not? We'll talk about income inequality and a whole bunch of other stuff, and we'll want you to join in that debate. My first segment, I usually go on with some thoughts of my own for about 20 minutes or so, and I'll talk about a little bit of national stuff, maybe some state stuff, and certainly some local stuff. But on the national front, a few things happened this week that got me thinking. It's no secret I was once a Democrat turned Republican. I'm a Republican presently. I'm sort of a fiscal conservative, socially moderate guy, like 80% of the population is, I think. I've been critical of Republicans in the past for being so anti-Obama that if he says up, they'll say down. If he says in, they say out. No different than partisan Democrats, what they did with George Bush. And, I've often seen that when it comes to foreign policy. Is Obama a weak leader? Are all the problems that we're seeing now in Eastern Europe the result of that weakness? He's a very complicated guy. Is he a Jimmy Carter? He's certainly not a Ronald Reagan. I mean, on the one hand, he goes on the apology tour when he first got in office, which I thought was disgraceful. He really was talking up our failures around the world. He toned that down a little bit after the fact because of the legitimate criticism, I thought. But on the other hand, he'll take the initiative to go after bin Laden. Then you have him looking to close down Guantanamo, which was incredibly naive on his part, which is why you don't see it shut right now. He talks the rhetoric, but didn't really shut it because he knew what it entailed to do so. Those guys were going to have to be let free or come onto the mainland. But then again, he's had more drone attacks than anyone would have thought. And he's actually defended the NSA in collecting data, not in spying on your conversations, but at least correlating all of the calls that are made. So it's a tough guy to figure out, but this week he did something that I thought was unbelievable, and it really put him closer to that Jimmy Carter part of the scale than someone who's more moderate or hawkish. And it's okay to be, deliberative in your actions. That's a smart thing. But to do something as gratuitously foolish as the president did this week, I can't recall anything so gratuitous and so foolish on the foreign policy front in some time. He basically said to Mr. Putin and to the Soviet Union and to the whole world, we will not use military action in response to the Russian aggression. Now, listen, I don't want a war. I don't want to use military action. I'm weary of the war, just like everybody else. We've had enough of it. We're tired. It's been Iraq. It's been Afghanistan. But for goodness sake, you don't say that out loud. You never, ever put your cards on the table and tell an adversary, hey, guess what? If you roll in over the borders of your neighbor, military force from the other side is off the table. Absolutely absurd. Now, Richard Nixon, what he used to do is he used to tell Henry Kissinger, and everybody, for all his flaws, people will, for the most part, concur that Nixon had a very sharp foreign policy. And he would tell Kissinger to go to the enemy and kind of wink, wink, nod, nod. I'd like to be able to do these things, but my boss, he's a little off kilter. Sometimes he's a little bit of a madman. That put them on their heels. Ronald Reagan was somewhat like that as well. Now, we don't want a cowboy who's going to be bringing us into unnecessary wars. But by the same token, you've got to keep your enemy on their toes. Being deliberative is smart. Being resigned leads to war. And that's a big, big mistake, and I hope it's never made again. Now, the other place where Republicans go after Obama a lot is on his tendency to do the talk show circuit. Leno and Jimmy Kimmel and Jimmy Fallon and The View. And just a couple of weeks ago, Between Two Ferns with Jack, whatever his name is, the guy from The Hangover. Funny stuff, but the Republicans will say it's demeaning. And, I think there's a little jealousy on the part of the Republicans because Obama's good at it and he's a cool guy and he's tapping into that young market that doesn't read newspapers, that doesn't look at the network news, which barely exists anymore. They get their news from Jon Stewart and from Colbert and these other outlets. The Democrats are taking advantage of it to a very high degree and tapping that voter bloc. But does there reach a point where it does demean the office? Clinton did it on Arsenio Hall, and George Bush the first did it with Dana Carvey on Saturday Night Live, and Nixon was on Laughing. But there is a degree, and I've cut a lot of slack for the president, but this week when he's doing the brackets for the NCAA basketball championship, while Putin just took over Crimea and has his troops lined up on the Ukraine. I mean, the optics are awful here. You can't be doing this stuff. Jimmy Carter huddled into his Rose Garden strategy after the Iran hostages, during the Iran hostages. And that was a mistake because he overplayed it. But on the other end of the extreme is the president who is doing NCAA on TV when Putin is trying to reassemble the Soviet empire. Really, really bad optics. The Republicans often overplay it on this, but in this case, the president has to be careful. He is demeaning the office when he does these things in these times of crisis, and it is a time of crisis. And when you do this stuff, you send out the message that there's no seriousness of purpose there. So, let's be on the lookout to see if that continues in the future. Let's shift gears locally here. Earlier this week, or maybe it was last week, there was a Newsday gotcha reporter, one of their investigative reporters on a colleague of this station, and the radio station moderator, asked point blank, listen, you guys have a bias, don't you? You obviously have an anti-Republican, anti-conservative bias. Even the coverage with yours truly was very biased, so said the moderator, and the reporter said, oh, no, absolutely not. There's no bias there. We're equal opportunity haters. We'll go after everybody, and they said in my case, they changed their attitudes toward me, not because I switched to Republican, but because I ran for governor. And well, let's examine why that's absolutely not true. Let's use an example that I saw just this past week to show that there is bias in the media, and a liberal bias, even in the local media here. There was an article, front page, GOP power player, 2 pages thereafter, 3 full pages in Newsday about Ed Mangano, the Republican county executive, and his chief deputy, Rob Walker. And Rob Walker heads up this Hicksville Republican committee. And Newsday makes it into some scandalous thing that he's heading up the committee and they're raising money, lots of money. And lo and behold, a lot of those donors are from these entities that have done business with the county, do business with the county, certainly making it appear that this is some kind of scandal, that it's illegal. I didn't say it's illegal, but certainly was the indication that this is scandalous. Now, there are a lot of local clubs out there, Democrat and Republican clubs. Some make more money than others. And certainly when you have the chief deputy on there, he's going to raise a lot more money. But was it this scandal that they said it is? Well, they said, oh, well, we might not be saying it's illegal. We just wanted to shed some light on this. Okay. All right. Well, if you're just going to shed some light on that, isn't it interesting that they just shine the light on a Republican county executive over in Nassau? No light shown over here in Suffolk with Democratic administrations. And let me give you a perfect example. When the present county executive, Steve Ballone, was running for county executive, he was the Babylon supervisor. And he appointed as his campaign manager his best friend, Robert Strickoff. Very nice guy, competent guy, affable guy. But he was also the leader of the Babylon Democratic Party. Okay, so you say big deal, that happens a lot, you know. But then on top of that, he was appointed by Supervisor Ballone to be the head of the Babylon IDA, Industrial Development Agency, the entity in the town that determines which companies out there are getting tax breaks. So, you know, on the one hand, they're saying, what a scandal that it's so incestuous that Rob Walker, the chief deputy, is the head of a Republican club and is getting money from these entities that do business with the county. But they don't seem to care that in Suffolk County, you have a Democratic executive who was a town supervisor who had appointed his best friend, who was the town Democratic leader, to the IDA. No problem there. No expose there. So if all you wanted to do was shine the light, they seem to be shining it where Republicans are concerned, but don't really want to shine any light where there's a Democrat involved. Now, I'm not suggesting that there was anything untoward or illegal with what was happening in Babylon town in that case, but there was no interest by Newsday to write any story, let alone a front page story and 3 other pages to follow. And I recall this is very similar to what happened with a story they ran about me in I think it was 2010 or 11, about the county jail. They had this big front page expose, or they wanted to call it that. You know, Steve Levy is $4 million, and he raised so much of it by these entities. Some did business with the county, some did not. Some did work on the jail, whether it was a union or a contract or whatever. Nothing illegal about that. Nothing unusual that the person before had accepted or the person after. So I had told them, look, if you want to change the system, you change the system. It's a lousy system, but no one's going to raise $1 million, $2, $3 million by shunning contributions when you don't have a public financing system, which I'm a big fan of, because if you had that, you'd have a separate pool. But the point is, that wasn't an article that wasn't of interest when I was a Democrat. When I was a Republican, it became interest. And what's most ironic is I had sued the county to stop the building of that jail in the very first instance. I didn't want that jail. And yet the insinuation here was that it was being built so that there can be donations that come about as a result. So you say, okay, well, that was happened, that was about you running for governor and not being a Democrat or Republican. That's a bunch of bunk, and here's why. Because I told them, you know what? If you think this is so bad, which is nothing wrong with it, check out, the guy who's running to take my place, who is Mr. Ballone. He's having a fundraiser next week. I can guarantee you, take a camera, see who's going into that particular event, and they're the same people. They'll be the same people. Engineers, architects, lawyers, unions, a lot of other people as well. And write a story about that. Write a story about that. People doing business with the town of Babylon, people doing business with the town, with the county of Suffolk. They didn't care. They didn't do it. They still haven't done it. So that's where you see this bias seeping through. Oh, very scandalous, terrible with this Republican county executive over in Nassau County, Mr. Mangano. So incestuous, we have to shine a light. But we're going to look the other way if there's a person with a D in front of their name. Now, why does this happen? People in the media will deny it. And they deny it, I think, because they don't see it happening. And why don't they see it happening? Well, it's because we look at life through our own glasses, through our own prism, through our own life experiences. And, if you're a conservative Republican in college, where are you going? What kind of trade are you going to? You're going to go into banking. You're going to be in economics, okay? If you're a save the world liberal, you're going into sociology or journalism in many cases. And the facts bear it out. Surveys have shown of journalists themselves, sometimes it's as much as 70, 90% identify themselves as either Democrats or slanting liberal. And a perfect example of that, again, that we saw in Suffolk County is how they covered the issue of illegal immigration. And a perfect example of that was a reporter that Newsday had as their prime guy, Bart Jones. Now, Bart Jones was a guy who was a missionary in Central or South America, comes back and gets the illegal immigration beat, okay? And he starts writing one article after another in the late 90s and in the early part of the 2000s. And when you write an article, folks, as a journalist, you can take a neutral stance or you will determine what is written about, what quotes you get, what angle you take. And let's use illegal immigration. You can write an article from the perspective, for instance, of the homeowner. Now, here you are as a homeowner who saved up all your life, you and your wife or you and your husband. You finally buy that nice house with the white picket fence in a nice area where you hope it's going to be safe and you have nice schools. Then what started happening? You started having houses all around you, single-family houses, with absentee landlords stuffing 20 or 30 people into these homes. Now, do you remember reading any articles from the perspective of that homeowner from Bart Jones or these folks at Newsday or these folks at the New York Times? No, you didn't. You would read the article from the perspective of the illegal immigrant. And why is that? Because, again, liberals in the media write from their own perspective. They see the world as two classes, the exploiters and the exploited. And that is the conflict that they love to write about. And many of them, not all, but many of them see themselves as the great cleansers, the great liberators, the ones who will shine the light and expose the exploitation from the bad guys against the helpless. And they are going to lead the charge to help the helpless. So what do? They paint the illegal alien who comes over here as the victim of whom? Oh, those mean, deplorable, xenophobic, anti-immigrant, basically white, racist bigots in suburbia. They don't look at it that, hey, this is just a regular family who saved up all their life to have their home with their kid, their 8-year-old kid, to wait outside in safety at the bus stop. And now they've got 4 houses around them with 20 or 30 single men in there who, just totally disrupted the whole character of the neighborhood. Not that they're bad people, but you don't come to suburbia to have, in some cases, 60 people stuffed into the house next door. You never saw articles about the perspective of those folks. They were cast as the bad guys. Again, because the liberals who write this stuff write it from their perspective of the world. You're either a victim or you're an exploiter. That's what sells papers. That, for many of these reporters who want their Pulitzer, is their reason for being. Now, I'm not overgeneralizing here. That's just a few. I don't even know if it's the majority, but there's a lot of them out there. And you see it in example after example. So it's prompting me to write a book, Bias in the Media, which will be published within the next month or two. And there'll be 20, 30 examples of this over and over and over. But the thing that brought it back fresh in my mind this week was that article about County Executive Mangano. It's the second time they've run that article, given the insinuation that there's something scandalous and improper about it. and yet you can see they do it very, very selectively. Well, there's a couple of other things to talk about locally. One of the things I wanted to say bravo to was a rally that was held this week and initiated by County Executive Ballone, which calls for more bus aid here in Suffolk County. Bravo, because I've been doing the same thing for many, many years. The state of New York absolutely shortchanges Suffolk County. If you compare us to Nassau County, they're putting in about $2 million a year, $3 million a year into their bus system. We put in about $29 million, and we only get $22 million in aid from the state, and Nassau gets like 3 times that amount. So there's many people who say, oh, well, that's because Nassau has a better system. No, well, Nassau has a better system because they get more aid, and it's unfair. And Suffolk has more people than Nassau. We have 3 times the geography as Nassau. We need that money. It's unfair. The county executive is absolutely right. The people of the state should listen up. Governor Cuomo should come up with more money. We're not asking for Nassau to be cut. We're not asking for Westchester to be cut, which, by the way, has far fewer people in Suffolk County and yet gets far more in their transportation aid as well. We're getting shortchanged. Same thing with the sewer aid. Now with Sandy, Nassau got devastated, unquestionably, but they're getting about $1 billion, $600 million to $1 billion to rebuild their sewers. You know what Suffolk's getting? Nothing. They're 100% sewered in Nassau County. We're 30%. We need that money desperately. We're shortchanged. We need the state to take another look and treat us with more equity. All right, that was a fun 20 minutes. We want you to come back in the next 20 when the phones will open, and we're going to have former Commissioner Rich Dormer, an outstanding public servant over the years to the Suffolk County Police Department. He did an amazing job in lowering crime and, more importantly, lowering costs as well in that department. And we're going to want to hear from you. We're at 451-1039 here on Long Island News Radio, your radio station. And after that, we're going to have the battle between the Tea Party and the unions in our third segment. Come on back. It's going to be a blast. We're back. County Executive Steve Levy here. I should say former County Executive Steve Levy. Welcoming you back to Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy here on Long Island News Radio, 103.9 FM. And we want you all to call in. During the break, we had about 3 or 4 people calling in. And I know they hung up and while it was commercial, so we're going to ask them to call back. We might put you on hold a little bit, but we will get to you at 451-1039. I'm very happy to welcome Richard Dormer, the fellow that I was smart enough to appoint as the Commissioner of Police back in 2004, a longstanding, great public servant in the police department. And welcome aboard, Rich. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Steve, and good afternoon to all your listeners.
Well, first, I want to commend you and I want to thank you. You know, when you came on board with us, you know, we promised to do some sweeping reforms in the department, and that the department always did a great job in keeping us safe. We're always one of the safest communities in the nation, but it was very, very expensive, and we thought we could make the department more efficient. We can't control salaries because that's through arbitration, but the way you assign police is very important to fighting crime, and I think after the 8 years, we wound up with a heck of a record, or you did at least. I think it was over 20% cut in crime while still controlling costs. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Steve. And, you know, it all had to do with the redeployment of our resources, of our detectives and our cops on the street. And, you know, Steve, I've mentioned this many times. I couldn't have done the reforms in the police department if I didn't have the support of the county executive. And you were committed to supporting my initiatives to make the department more effective and more efficient.
Well, I want to get into what they were, but this is the People's Program. They're calling in. Let's go to Charlie in Setauket, and then we'll get back to more conversation with Rich Dormer. Charles, are you there? Charlie from Setauket, are you with us? I know you're on hold for a while. Here you are.
Hey, Mr. Levy.
Hi, Charlie. Thanks for calling.
All right, thanks. I don't want to go off topic, but it kind of relates to some of the other things you were saying before. My question to you is about transparency in government. And one of the things that I've always wondered, maybe you could elaborate on a little bit, is the reason that you didn't run anymore or gave back that campaign money. Mm-hmm. I always felt as a citizen and a taxpayer that we never really got a full explanation. Is there any chance that you could elaborate?
Yeah, well, I did so already with Jay Oliver when I was on his show earlier. You know, I had run for governor, switched parties, and at that point, you know, it's kind of a man without a country. Not, you know, you're not really. You burned the bridge on the Democrats you were with. You never really totally accepted with the people who were against you for a long time. So I was kind of burnt out, and I knew that there was the potential for one more run as county executive, but that would be it. After running and losing for governor, that was pretty much the end of the line. And then in between, you know, there was some looking into the campaign side, but if you do read some of the statements that were made public already, nothing that had to do with anything personal about me profiting with anything personal. I could tell you there was no pay to play. What there was talk about in the actual public statements was possible use of public resources, and that could be anything from somebody in a campaign looking at a computer for campaign stuff. So with all of that, I decided I'm not running. I've already run for governor, didn't make it. I'm not going to run again, and that pretty much put it to bed for people who are in my employ and stuff like that. So, but with the transparency part, what we're talking about here is how the media treats these situations. And if you look at what's going on right now in Nassau County, again, it makes it look like there's something scandalous going on there in Nassau, and there's not the same kind of reflection on someone who might be in the Democratic Party. Remember, when I was a Democrat, nobody cared about the donations that were coming that from people who might have done business with the county. When I was a Republican, all of a sudden, to Newsday, it was a big deal.
Right.
So,
okay. I mean, they just kind of left it hanging that, and you got to admit, to give back $4 million or however much it was, it seemed like it was pretty serious kind of stuff, and it just seemed like there was a kind of an agreement between you and the DA, and we never really got like the nuts.
Well, I'll tell you, I've always been of the belief that, and I've said this publicly many, many times before, that once you get that money in the bank and you leave, what they used to do is convert that for personal purposes, or they would use it for lunches for this, that one, or anybody else. And it shouldn't be that way. When you're leaving office, you should give that money back anyway. So once I decided that I was not going to be running again, it really wasn't a tough decision for me to say, well, that's not my money anyway. The people who contributed should get it back. But now we have Rich. Thanks for the call, Charlie. I appreciate it. Rich, we were talking about the amazing things that you did in the Suffolk County Police Department. And the 20% reduction in crime. That's not an easy thing to do, but somehow you made it happen, and you did it while still controlling cost. What were some of the methods that you employed to get on top of it?
Well, we initiated a CompStat procedure in the police department, and this, by the way, was very successful in New York City. Initiated by Bratton in his first go-around as police commissioner. So that was introduced, and it's data-driven. We would sit with commanders on a regular basis going over hotspot policing based on where the numbers of burglaries, robberies, what have you, car break-ins would occur. And then we'd concentrate on that location with our undercovers, if it was appropriate, with our patrol, with talking to the neighbors, talking to informants. And so that's how we brought crime down, by concentrating on the hot spots. And by the way, this is not new in policing. Old-time cops had their own hot spots. They knew where the hot spots were. But this was data-driven. Now today, you'll read about a whole new predictive type of policing. Well, it's a new name for really hotspot policing. It's not the new, it's just a new semantics.
Well, I remember when, there was an uptick of crime in the Huntington Station area. There were some shootings, there was a lot of gang warfare. And what we collectively decided to do was, with your initiative, take the gang-related officers that were sprinkled throughout 7 different precincts in the county who were diverted in their own little decentralized areas, and you combined them, consolidated them into a single gang unit for the first time. And what did that do for our ability to relocate them to the hotspots?
Well, Steve, I should, for informational purposes, indicate there were only 2 or 3 precincts that had gang units at that time, and there was only a couple of cops in each of the 3 precincts, which was 6 or 7 cops. And we had gang problems throughout almost all the precincts. So we decided to form a centralized gang unit. And by the way, the Justice Department in Washington has recommended this. And we pointed out this to the critics when we got criticized for it, Steve. And again, this was something that was lost in the spin. But we created this centralized gang unit with over 20 hard-nosed, smart police officers with good supervision, with a commander. And we, working with the FBI, concentrated on Huntington Station, Central Islip, Brentwood, North Bellport, and other hotspots where there was a lot of gang activity. The first precinct, Wyandanch, was another one. And so working with the feds, we had a force multiplier. That meant we had officers out 7 days a week during the time that the gang people were on the streets. We identified who the gang members were. We concentrated on them. And working with the FBI, and by the way, the only way you can really do this is work with the feds, because they have a lot of prosecutorial initiatives that we don't have in the state system.
Yeah, it surprised me that, when the new county executive came in, he disbanded a unit that we had put together that did work on a daily basis with the FBI, sharing information. It was very surprising.
Yeah.
I think there was a little criticism after that. I think they backed off that.
Well, I think that was a bad move. And, I'm not here to criticize the present administration. That's not my objective. But we carefully looked at why you would have a centralized gang unit working with the FBI. Mm-hmm. We had detectives on the FBI gang task force. They were removed when the new administration came in. And I thought that wasn't a smart move.
Right.
And they reversed later. And I should say, by the way, that we had in the pipeline over 15 murderers, gang murderers, that the FBI had identified and had indicted when we were in office, Steve.
Right.
They didn't make the arrests till after we left. But we were the ones, along with that gang unit and the task force, identified who these people were and gathered the evidence to prosecute them.
Well, if you're just tuning in now, you're listening to Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, and this is Richard Dormer, the former commissioner of police in Suffolk County. You're listening live. It's 451-1039 if you want to join in the conversation. But there, you mentioned how we had consolidated the gang unit to get these guys to the hot spots where we needed them. You didn't need these gang officers in places where there were no gang activity. You wanted to be able to deploy them. And when they were stuck in the precincts, you couldn't take that officer out of the precinct and put him in another precinct where he was more needed. Another example of that, of putting them where they were needed, I remember we came under a lot of heat when we ended the concept of minimum staffing. But in the old days, you had about 2 cops to a car in a graveyard shift where 3:30 in the morning in areas that had no crime, nothing happening. And then, you had no one available. If you had fewer people available for the time that you needed the most. I remember we took a lot of flack for it, but it did seem to pay off.
There was a lot of pushback on that. And by the way, again, it's data driven. You're looking at your calls for service. When is the highest calls for service? During the days and especially in the evenings, on weekends. And so you need more officers and more cars on patrol at that time. You need more people out there. You don't need them at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
And so that was a very simple concept. But again, Steve, you and I have talked about this, and your listeners will probably nod their heads when they hear this. The pushback was tremendous. I mean...
As it was when, we embarked on a big civilianization program. I know when we first came in, more than half of all the officers were not on patrol duty. They were either behind a desk or doing something else that was non-patrol related. You so changed that over the 8 years that by the time you left, only 35% of the officers were on non-patrol. And that made a big difference because you're able to put more guys in the hotspots and you don't have to hire as many, and that's a cost saving.
Well, Steve, the numbers don't lie. We put 150 cops back on the streets. We took them from behind desks in headquarters and in the precincts, and we put them back out on foot posts and in sector cars, doing the job that they were hired to do. And we hired civilians in some instances to fill in what they were doing, but not every instance required somebody to fill what they were doing. Right. And so that was 150 cops. That is a tremendous savings for the taxpayer of Suffolk County. Yeah. Millions and millions of dollars
really,
saved. Yeah,
more money saved and crime going down. Again, 20% overall drop in crime over that 10-year period. There was an article in Newsday this week, which, again, it really caught my attention. And this is what drives me nuts sometimes about the media, where, I'm looking at, I'm seeing these charts, and I'm seeing, crime in 2012 up 20%, then down 6.5%, and then down again 11% in 2014. And they're accrediting this to all these new things that were supposedly being done. And then I look at this, first of all, I thought that was a drop for the whole year. And then I looked further. It was for 2 months.
The winter months.
It was the winter months from January and February. If you can get crime down this year in January and February, which was the coldest in I don't know how many decades, of course you're going to see an artificial drop in a case like that. We hope that over the course of the whole year, it will really be a true drop. Nobody wants crime to go up, but the idea that there's something new being done now, I don't know what that is. I mean, the suggestion is there's this intelligence-driven policing as though it wasn't done before. I mean, Suffolk adopted the New York City model back in 2004, correct?
Instead of intelligence, use data-driven. That's what we called it.
Right.
They're calling it intelligence-driven, which is fine. Mm-hmm. It should be based, the deployment of your officers should be based on the hotspots. And by the way, when I read that story, the crime was down, and then in the middle of the article, it had a little blurb that it was the winter months. Now, most people don't read that far into these articles. Look, I predict, by the way, with the hot weather coming and the summer months coming, crime is going to go up.
Well, it'll go up from where it is now.
Exactly.
Hopefully, it'll be down, to the summer compared to last year and the one before that. That's what we all want.
Well, listen, Steve, you and I have always claimed that Suffolk County is one of the safest counties anywhere in the country. And that's still true.
And they're a great police department. I always complain about the union and the salaries and the benefits and all that stuff. That's separate and apart from the rank and file officer who do a fantastic job. They're totally dedicated. And thank God for them. They make it a great place to live and do help our property values rise as a result. Couldn't let you go without talking about this. And by the way, folks, you're listening to Commissioner Dormer, former Commissioner Rich Dormer of the Suffolk County Police Department. You're listening to Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. The number is 451-1039. Again, the media, which drives you nuts, how they ginned up this myth that the Suffolk County Police Department was hostile to the Hispanic community. And I know it made you go nuts because, in fact, civilian complaints under your tenure actually went down significantly because of
over 50% they went down, which is a dramatic drop in complaints. And
what do you attribute that to?
Well, we have put in a couple of processes. One was the early alert system, where if an officer got a couple of complaints or 3 complaints in a month, it would show up as an alert with his commander. And the other thing that we did, we tied their civilian complaint history to promotion. We looked at that carefully if we were going to make somebody a sergeant, a lieutenant, or a detective. And so the word went out to the officers, you have to be careful how you deal with people. And they responded. By the way, that's management's problem. That's management's initiative. It's top-down driven.
And it did work because all of those complaints went down, from the civilian community. But what's most ironic, again, the thing that drove me nuts about the media was the non-stop article after article after article suggesting that Suffolk County police officers were ignoring the complaints of Hispanics in particular, Hispanic immigrants, when they were assaulted. And there was absolutely no evidence of that. And then all that media hype led to a Justice Department investigation, 5 years of this investigation, and then they issue a report. And what does the headline say? Suggest that Suffolk was backed into a corner and had to settle because they had done wrong. And then I'm looking at them saying, the headline should have been Suffolk Police vindicated because after 5 years, Rich, there was not a single instance of any officer cited there who had information that should have led to arrest who did not arrest someone who had attacked Hispanic. Did you ever see it as commissioner that an officer had enough evidence to arrest someone who actually implemented one of these assaults and wasn't arrested?
Never happened, Steve. And by the way, when this terrible murder went down in Patchogue, and we initiated a process where we examined a year's worth of reports in every precinct. I had the captains sat every day going through every report that came into the police department to see if we missed one. Not one showed up. And that included every precinct, the 7 precincts we did at that time. We analyzed every call that the officers had received. Not one of them did they not make an arrest where they should have made an arrest. And this thing, by the way, tarnished not just the police department, but the community of Patchogue and Suffolk County, unfairly, by the way. And the Justice Department report reflected that. But like you said, Steve, the headline didn't say Suffolk County Police vindicated.
Right.
But if you read the whole story and you read it carefully, and your listeners out there, if you've paid attention to that report, will agree there was no smoking gun.
Yeah, the police department had done a fine job, and it was just terrible the way they were disparate. Again, just to sell newspapers, and they allowed.
And by the way, Steve, if I may, and this again got lost in the fog of this whole story. The night that incident happened with Lucera, the killing of Lucera, these people were apprehended within minutes.
And they're doing time now
by officers in the precinct.
Right.
before they scattered to the wind.
If you were reading from other parts of the country about what was going on here, you would think that they had been let go. It was the police department who got them, and they were prosecuted by Suffolk
County. And the
County,
evidence was collected properly.
Right.
And so the DA could prosecute them properly.
Well,
so everything was done properly.
I got about a minute left. I want to go into this idea of park police now doing some work with the PD, and I'm trying to figure out, is this good or is it not? It sounds like it could be a good thing, but it could also be a disaster, and the devil's in the details. If they're able to use retired cops, that's great. I tried to do it with the PAL, as you remember, Police Athletic League, and they shut us down. If parks guys, when they're slower in the winter, can help out in the streets, that's great. We were shot down whenever something like that would happen. Why are they agreeing to it now? I have to think that there's a catch here that is going to cost us more in the long term. I mean, if they're going to, in a few years down the road, start getting police pay, we're going to get clobbered. But if they're indeed retired officers and they stay as part-time at those salaries, it could be a good thing. I'm not sure. Have you had a chance to digest this as to what the details are?
Well, because not too many details are coming out. I have a couple of thoughts on this. One is anything that puts more cops on the street is good for Suffolk County, is good for the taxpayer, and is good for everybody's safety. But you have to look at the fine print. What is it going to cost? And by the way, the feedback I get from people within the department at the lower levels is that they're concerned that the park police haven't taken the same tests as Suffolk County PD. They haven't been vetted the same way. So there's that concern with the officer on the street in Suffolk County. So,
hopefully they'll take heed of that.
Hopefully we'll all see the details and be able to examine the costs of this, because there's always a cost.
I hope it does work out. I remember when we tried to do retired cops at PAL, it would have saved us $1 million a year. They shot it down. There's got to be a catch here why they're agreeing to it now, but I hope there's not. I hope it does save money. It makes us safer. Hey, Rich Norman, thank you for what you've done for Suffolk County, for making it more efficient, and for making us one of the safest suburban communities in the nation. Be back at the next hour. Come on back.
political correctness, you've come to the wrong place. It's Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, 1039 LI News Radio.
And welcome back, folks, to the second half of our show. In this next 20-minute segment, we're going to have some fun because we have what we call balance on this show. We're not some of those shows where you just get one side, where it's a big fluff piece. We like to discuss issues. It's never personal, but it is spirited. And we have from the left, Roger Clayman, who is one of the heads of the Nassau-Suffolk AFL-CIO. Welcome to the first time to the show, Roger.
Thank you, and thank you for saying I'm from the left. I thought I was representing the mainstream.
Oh,
yeah, right.
The left always thinks that way, Steve.
Sure.
And Steve Flanagan is from the right. He is from the Conservative Society for Action, one of the. I don't know. Is it fair to say that you're one of the first Tea Party groups? You're a little
Yeah, kind of. We
that.
started before that, but we kind of fell into that whole category. People like to categorize people.
So it's just good that we have, different groups that represent different interests out there, and politics is all about balancing those interests. And we want to welcome all of our members of the public here on Long Island to chime into the debate and the conversation at 451-1039. The one that lit up the phones last week, guys, is when I was talking about the DREAM Act. And the DREAM Act, for those of you who don't know, is the concept of allowing those who are here illegally in this country, young people, who went through high school here and now looking to go into state universities. Well, they are allowed to go to our universities. Not only that, but now there is this proposal to DREAM Act to give them the state taxpayer subsidy that would go to any other student. And I was apoplectic about that. I said it's hard enough for a regular citizen who worked hard all their lives, saving their nickels and dimes, foregoing their dinners and this and that to pay for their kids' education. And then, the pot is shrunken by now starting to give those who are illegally here. And granted, they might have been kids, and it was, it's not fair. It certainly is. But sometimes when this stuff happens, it leads to a sense of unfairness. But what will be even less fair is when people who are here legitimately get shut out of a spot in a state university, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, it does matter who you vote for, because the Republican bloc of the New York State Senate from Long Island was a deciding vote in blocking the DREAM Act from getting into the bill. It's not final yet. They might capitulate in negotiation, but so far they blocked it. Newsday is saying, you should support it. I'm glad they did. I think it makes a difference. And I'm sure we're going to have a difference of opinion between you two fellas. So, Rod, you heard what I said, and I know you've always been an advocate for this kind of thing. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's a vote against education is the way I see it, and not allowing DREAM Act students to access what's really TAP funds, which are the scholarship funds that the state provides. It's not exactly paying for their college education. It's allowing them to apply for, based on merit and need, to access the scholarship funds that everyone else is. Now, I know several DREAM Act students who live here. They came here very early in life. Their parents came in without documents. They grew up here. This is the only place they've ever really known. They're no different from anyone else around them, except for the fact that their parents came into this country without documents. And they could make an enormous contribution based on their intelligence and their commitment and their drive. And why not? Why not give them that opportunity and make them part of our very motivated and productive workforce by allowing them to access scholarship funds to go to college?
Steve, dare you hear from the left, or Roger would say the mainstreamy things, that it's not a big deal. What are your thoughts?
Well, I always thought we were a country of laws, and I always thought we were a country that, if you played the game right and did things right, that you would get an opportunity to succeed. As far as immigration is concerned, I'm all for immigration, all right? My parents came here from Italy. My parents came here from Ireland. They all came in here legally. My mom was English as a second language type of a person. She took advantage of our education system and did quite well. But never was it ever suggested that they be helped along through any kind of an illegal type of a thing. As a matter of fact, our ancestors came here and they wanted to assimilate into our society. We talked about the Great Society and the growth of society, and we all talked about assimilation and integration. I don't know if you recall in the 60s, Martin Luther King, what did he say? Integration, integration, integration. We need all be together. Rule of law, doing what's right. I have no problem with immigrants coming to this country. I think they should come to this country. All the studies show that most people who come here want to work hard, they want jobs, they want to take care of their families, and they want to live the American dream. Okay. But I just don't think it's appropriate that you get around the law to come in and take advantage. And like you said, Steve, yourself, that's my money you're talking about. I want to help these kids. Come in here and work, do it legally, pay your taxes, contribute to society, and I'm all for all the education help you can get.
All right. We're going to get back to this and other issues. In the meantime, we got Jeff from Port Jeff, and folks, you're welcome to call at 451-1039. Welcome to the show, Jeff. Jeff, you with us?
Hello.
Hi, Jeff.
Yeah. Hello there. How are you?
Very good. Welcome to the show, Jeff. What's on your mind?
Well, you're talking about this topic, and it happens to be one of those topics that really gets me cranked. I'll tell you, the entitlement situation in this country is alive and well, gentlemen. I have no problem with immigration. I have no problem with legal immigration. I have no problem with people who come here and work hard. I have no problem with our ancestors who came here and worked hard and built this country. I do have a problem with entitlement, and I do have a problem with enabling that. And that's what this administration's been doing since this gentleman was elected, this officer-in-chief, or whatever you want to call him. I have a real problem. My biggest problem is the fact that it's gotten so bad, and it's gotten to the point now where you have the illegals running the asylum. So that's my comment. Anyone wish to retort?
I'd love to retort. In fact,
go for it. Thanks, Jeff. Hold on the line.
If we're talking about assimilation, no one could be more assimilated than some of the young DREAM Act students who are trying to become more assimilated. And nothing really compares with the immigration that of our ancestors, with the immigration that occurred within the last 10 to 15 years, which really took its largest leap after the passage of NAFTA. And we created the situation that forced people off of the land and up into our communities. Now, was it right? No, but people were fighting for some economic necessity.
So you're saying NAFTA led to this massive flood of illegal immigration when it wasn't the whole concept of, hold on, Jeff, I want you to comment on this too. Wasn't the whole concept of NAFTA that was pitched by Clinton and others before him that, hey, if you trade more with Mexico and enhance their standard of living, you'll actually get less. But notwithstanding that, I don't care one way or the other what effect NAFTA had. We've got a border, and if we don't enforce it, we're not a nation. What do you think of that, Jeff?
Listen, we have a border. It's not being enforced, and it's not only is it not being enforced, the people who are trying to enforce it are being told not to enforce it as well as they could be able to enforce it.
Well, I'll tell you, the ICE agents say that they actually have a lawsuit on this, claiming that their own federal government is handcuffing them from from deporting and carrying out its business, notwithstanding the fact that, yes, Obama has deported more than George Bush, but that's not saying much in this area. They definitely feel that their own government is hampering them from enforcing the law when it comes to illegal immigration. Do you see it that way, Steve?
Well, it's an issue of selective enforcement, and that seems to be a big problem in our country these days. The Congress of the United States passes law, and routinely the president says, well, I don't want to do that part of the law. I don't think that's appropriate. I want to delay this. I want to delay that. He doesn't have the constitutional authority to delay that. He's just done it. As far as this, support for, aliens, for college assistance and things, if you want to take out a loan and you can pay it, you can verify that you can do it. I've had 6 kids go through to college, okay? I've helped my best to pay, but I had to take loans. I had to go out and work my butt off, okay, to go and pay for those kids to go to school. And every time I applied for one of those applications, they want to know who I was, where I worked, what my tax return was, and how I could prove that I would be able to repay that loan. We're talking about a DREAM Act. Listen, I'm all in favor of young kids doing well in this country. But again, This is an entitlement type of an issue. It's a legality type of an issue. And if I had a hard time getting loans for my kids, I don't know why we would sit here and write legislation that people who came to this country illegally should be entitled to get that type of service.
I want to get Roger commenting more on this. But hey, thanks for your call, Jeff. I appreciate it. We're going to go to Bob in Bayport. Then I want to hear more from Roger. Bob, can you hear us, Bob?
Good.
Bob, welcome to the show. This is Steve Levy.
Hello, Steve. I enjoy your program. I listen every weekend.
Great. I'll tell you, sometimes I wonder when it's a nice sunny day, are we going to get anybody listening? But the weather might be good, but it's good to know we have some stalwarts out there, Bob. So what's on your mind, buddy?
I tend to listen to it on my smartphone, so it doesn't matter where I am, and I can listen to it.
Great point.
I tend to agree with Mr. Flanagan. I think we're a nation of laws. And if we don't follow the laws and we promote illegal behavior, we're just going down a slippery slope. And if we could just, and another point that you mentioned, Mr. Levy, is I think we have to focus in on our borders. We have to close our borders first before we start giving things away. And I just think that that's really the heart of it. As Mr. Flanagan said, you know, I had to work through college to get through college. I didn't get anything from any state subsidy. My parents were both teachers. They worked hard. They gave me the work ethic to get through college. And for me to turn around and find out now they want to give it to people who aren't even here legally is troublesome to me.
All right, well, hold on, Bob, because I feel like we're ganging up on Roger over here. It's kind of like 2-1 in the studio, and then it's like 4-1 when we hear from the folks calling in. So, Roger, go ahead.
I think your callers have made the point that we need immigration reform. It points to the need that we've done the border enforcement. In fact, enforcement is up substantially in recent years. Deportations are up under the Obama administration, and I think needlessly. I think the issue is what hasn't been done. What hasn't been done is to do what labor and management, the Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO agreed to do, which is to have an orderly flow of immigrants to help businesses' needs.
But I don't think we're opposed. I mean, people mistakenly say, oh, Steve, you're anti-immigrant. I hate when the media does that because I'm not anti-immigrant. I'm very much pro-immigrant. I think immigrants are so important to this nation. I want more immigrants in this country. I just want them to be processed. I want us to determine who comes in and who doesn't come in, and it to be legal.
And we want to give them rights, Steve. We want to make certain that they've got rights in the workplace.
If you come in the right way, but it kills me, Raj, when people come in here illegally and then say, I've got rights, and one of those rights is to get taxpayer-subsidized education on a college level. It blows my mind.
What about
it also creates that impression, like this caller just said. You're creating an entitlement impression. I have no problem with people coming to this country who want to work hard. They want to care for their families. They want a better place. They want a better life. That's what the American dream is all about. All for that. My ancestors, and I'm still for that. Because a good, strong people coming in from the outside are bringing that work ethic. They're bringing that family ethic to our shores. If we're creating an environment where people are coming to this country because we have the most liberal type of entitlements, welfare state, things like that, they're coming here for the wrong reason. We want people to come here for opportunity. We want them to come here to work. We want them to come to do what's better for their country.
But they do come to work, and they work their tails off, even the undocumented. But mark my words, once you have citizenship granted, that work ethic is going to die because a lot of people are going to sit back and say, well, I mean, I can get that for free? and you're going to see the same cycle of poverty.
What's going to die is exploitation is what's going to die because that's what's going on in the workplace. And employers like to have immigrants who don't have documents and don't have papers.
Agree. And that's why big business is just as much to blame from the right as the Democrats are from the left who just see this as free votes down the road. Hey, Bob, any further questions before we change the subject here?
If you don't mind, Mr. Levy, in all due respect to the gentleman who was for the DREAM Act.
That's Roger Clayman from the AFL-CIO.
He was rattling off all these statistics, how it's gotten better, less immigration since Obama's been in office. I'd like to just leave with this. The only reason why there's less immigration since Obama's been in office is because our economy is in the tank. So there's very little purpose. What are they moving to? They're moving from a horrible economy to a bad economy.
Well,
So
hey,
there really
thanks for your point. I'll let Roger comment on that, and keep listening on your phone. Thanks so much for calling in, Bob. Raj?
I think
will do so. Thank you very much.
I think the focus on the immigrant is to miss the main point about our economy. It's not who is here necessarily working, it's what we're failing to do in economic policy in terms of creating jobs and creating a middle class. We're undermining that middle class by policies that have caused some of the greatest inequality we've had in our history.
Well, I want to get into that now as a topic. Income inequality. It's a buzzword these days. Before we do, though, and we're way over with the DREAM Act, but that's what happens when you start talking about immigration on the show. I've got a Newsday article from just a couple days ago. It was yesterday, actually. 1.83% proposed Long Island school tax hikes, the lowest tax hikes in a long, long time. And I submit that that's because of the tax cap. I was a strong supporter of the tax cap for many, many years. I know, Steve, your group is supportive of it. But many folks out there still don't think it's a good idea. I think it is forced prioritization, and here it shows that it's working. Some folks have said that it has led to $500 million in savings over the last several years since it's been implemented. Yet, Raj, there's still groups out there who fight the tax cap. Where's your union come down on this? And if you, I don't know if you want to speak for the left on this, but there's still a lot of people out there who think this is the wrong way to go. It's an artificial cap.
Well, I'll speak for our labor movement. We never supported the tax cap because if you think that the entire goal is to cut taxes, and that's worthy. We want everybody's taxes to be as low as possible, but we don't want to undermine what tax revenue is there to provide, which is a good education and adequate services. And if you look at what's been lost, you've lost 30,000 teachers in the state of New York. School budgets are being squeezed, and you're losing many of the electives in our school districts. We're losing what is, for Long Island, a natural resource, education. This is what makes us strong.
But are we really what? You know what blows my mind? I want Steve to comment on this too. You know what blows my mind? $19,000 per student is spent per student in Suffolk County, in New York State, excuse me. It blows away other states. We're the number one in the nation. You have other states that are half what we pay per student, and yet their taxes are not nearly as high as ours, and yet they get educated too. It's not like we're number one blowing everybody else out of the water in New York State. Steve, what's your thoughts? Has the cap been working?
Well, you're onto something. I mean, this whole concept that money, necessarily results in improved education isn't necessarily so. But if you get right down to the actual, impact of the tax cap, it's been marginal at best. The concept of the tax cap was to basically cap property taxes, but it didn't necessarily cap spending in a school district. Because what happened is when we had the tax cap, all we did was shift the spending from, all on the backs of the property tax owner into the state side of the ledger. Now, if you look at the impact of the tax cap last year, okay, the average increase in spending by a school district on Long Island, 127 districts, was 3.8%. That's with a 2% tax cap. So where'd they get the other, 1 point whatever percent? Obviously, it came from state aid because there's two components to spending for education. The governor's talking about a tax freeze. It's still not going to reduce spending. It's not going to reduce spending. Everybody's sitting here and crying about, well, we've had a reduction in spending in schools and the tax cap's tightening things. It's not.
Well,
and it
so
hasn't.
Much of that,
but it hasn't.
And so much of that is generated by pensions, by the Triborough Amendment. Raj, have we reached a point where we just have to say the old system, of with health care benefits, where, like, still in Suffolk County, folks don't contribute. Listen, I'm going to be in that system at some point down the road. I'm the first one to say we should all contribute, because if we contributed a little, it would save the system down the road. No health care contribution. I mean, some of the new guys coming in are now paying a little bit. Pensions are, now, shouldn't paint everyone with the same brush. A lot of folks are only getting $30,000 on their pension, but then you see like a Suffolk County police officer getting $125,000, $150,000 on a pension. doesn't there have to be some kind of reform here? Because that's what's driving the cost. The mandates are driving these costs, which is why you have to have a cap. What are your thoughts?
Well, if you look at it from that perspective, you have the state employee with an average pension of $19,000 across New York. So pensions are high in some cases, but on average, they're not high.
But that's disingenuous, isn't it? Because that's also including guys who had pensions going back for 30 years, where the pension kicked in 1984.
Well, there are people who retired and are collecting their pension, so we have nothing else to go on other than what people are collecting today. I think it's a larger view of this is the way we fund education, the way we fund services on the state level. If you wanted to provide some meaningful property tax relief to local people, which is a worthy goal, you do it through the circuit breaker concept, which would give people a break on their taxes when their level of payment of property taxes exceeded a certain percentage of their income.
So I would assume you would prefer to see an expansion of the circuit breaker, as Shelley Silver from the Assembly is recommending, rather than Governor Cuomo's proposal, which is to take money from this phantom surplus, which, by the way, we all know does not exist, right? He says it's a surplus, it's not there. But if and when this surplus ever materialized, he wants to give it back to everyone to keep them below, not only below the 2%, but to pay down that 2% to zero. You don't like that concept?
I don't think it's doable. I mean, he's constructed a fantastic and difficult kind of a method where you have to show that you've had enough work with you've combined services between school districts to such a degree, not counting anything you've ever done before, to achieve 1%, then 2%, then 5% of savings, and then you could get a circuit breaker if you do those things.
All right, I'm going to want to hear from Steve Flanagan to comment on that on the next segment. We got about 30 seconds left, folks. I want to invite you in the public to chime in. It's 631-451-1039. Call in. We've got one more segment to go with Roger Clayman from the AFL-CIO, Steve Flanagan from the CSA Tea Party Group, and we're going to be talking about the concept of income inequality. We're going to be talking maybe about paid sick days and family leave and minimum wage and what do we need to do to make it more affordable here? Get back to it. Okay. Welcome back, folks, to Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. In our final segment of this afternoon show, we have with us today Roger Clayman from the AFL-CIO Union here in Nassau, Suffolk County, from the left and from the right. CSA, Conservative Society of America, Society for Action. Steve Flanagan, one of the Tea Party groups. So we have right and left represented here, and we're going to talk about a whole bunch of issues, and we want you to join us, folks, at 451-1039. When we cut off the last segment, Steve Flanagan from the CSA, we were talking about the tax cap. Is it working? Is it not working? And Roger Clayman has a problem with the tax cap. He said if you do anything, we should be doing more circuit breakers, but tax cap does harm to our schools. And you say what?
Well, a couple of things. You know, we looked into circuit breakers before, and really what you're doing is you're indexing property taxes to income. You know, that all sounds really good and fair, but, you know, if I got a $400,000 house and I'm paying X amount, and the guy across the street didn't make any money last year, isn't paying anything, or he has the tax deductions and all that other kind of stuff, it's not necessarily a fair way. You know, I think property taxes have to be indexed, not indexed, they have to be basically based on the value of a home, equity value in a home, and that. So I disagree with that wholeheartedly as far as indexing. I just don't think that'll work. Plus, I think you're going to cut more money out of the system than you're going to put into it. As far as, you know, trying to get taxes under control and using a tax cap, sounds like a great idea. But the bottom line is, even with the tax cap, the last couple of years, the average spending in a school district went up 3.5%.
Well, a lot of they're drawing down on the reserves and getting state aid.
No, I'm talking about actual real dollar spending, okay?
But how do you fund that extra spending if you're capping your taxes? You have to use your reserves. You get more state aid, and then when that state aid dries, you're in trouble.
The state aid does it. The state aid is what's equalizing what's going on. That's how we got a 2% increase last year, and we're able to raise almost 4% as average spending. We also have, in the last 5 years, a 6% reduction in enrollment. I mean, that's why we have teachers who aren't have jobs. We don't have enough students in a lot of these school districts. Many districts are selling buildings. They're consolidating, things like that. But to get on to the one thing that you talked about, Steve, was pension reform.
And by the way, we've got Anthony from Stony Brook who's holding, so hold on a little bit more, Anthony.
Just one point. I think it's important. You talked about pension reform. You know, we did pension reform, Tier 6, all that kind of stuff. You can trace back the problems with our pension fund going back about 12, 13 years ago in New York State. A law was passed which took public employees, teachers and all public employees, municipalities, etc., and they exempted them from contributions to their pension plans after the 10th year of service. Now, I don't know why someone in Albany couldn't take a calculator and figure 10 years hence what that was going to do to contributions to our pension plans. But as you know, we're defined benefit. Taxpayer ends up picking up the bill, and that's what a lot of these expenses are in school districts, municipalities, and elsewhere that you know. So I'm in favor of pension repair, not pension reform. Let's go back to when we had a healthy pension system. Let's get the contributions where they historically had been, when we had a nice healthy pension system, and let's go back and repair the system rather than reform.
You can have a cap unless you get to the driving forces that are causing the spending increases. We're never going to get out of this problem. Hey, we've got Anthony from Stony Brook who wants to chime in. It's been an active day of callers. Welcome to the show, Anthony. Can you hear us, Anthony?
Yeah, hi.
Hi, Anthony. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
Good. What do you want? What's on your mind?
Well, I think basically the county, the state, federal government is all working in the wrong direction. The reason for that is because they're asking all these different departments, agencies for a budget, and which means that after a while, they get to a point where they have excess. They know that if they don't use that excess money, they're not going to get the same budget the following year.
You mean use it or lose it? Is that what you're talking about, Anthony?
No, I'm actually talking about reversing this thing. It should be the government that should be directing to their employees what they need to have.
Okay.
Instead of asking a department or an agency what they need to exist.
Well, I'll tell you, I know as a county executive, I could tell you, there's something called empire building within governments where department heads love their empires, and they all come back to try to get more and more and more money. And the key to good management is to hire people who get the message from the guy on top that I don't want to hear you telling me what you need, that you need more and more and more. I want you to tell me how you can do more with less. And that's what separates one type of government that can cut costs versus another type of government that just keeps spending. And I've always said, if you go to a school board, you go to county legislature, you go to a town, you have all these people coming forward who want to spend more money, and you could make the case for every one of those items. They could all be justified. But unless you're willing to say no, that we can't spend it all, you're going to explode. And that's why you need a tax cap. So thanks for calling, Anthony. We appreciate it very much. Well, we've got Al from Medford who's joining us as well. Al, can you hear us? Al, what's on your mind?
Oh, this is Al. Can you hear me?
I certainly can. You should put your radio down off, Al, and tell us what's on your mind. You're here with Roger Clayman from the AFL-CIO from the left, and Steve Flanagan from the CSA Tea Party group on the right, and yours truly, Steve Levy.
Well, Steve, I just like to say I'm a big fan. It's refreshing to hear a politician actually handle the immigration thing and say something about it. I wrote an article one time, and one thing about, I just came back, I rushed all the way back from Stony Brook. I volunteer for the veterans. I'm a veteran. And on Sundays, I go out to the VA Northport, and I cook breakfast for the volunteers at the veterans. And I am kind of thinking that we're giving our country away. I really feel that way. I'm an unemployed engineer operator, CDL driver. And I've been working for companies, and I work for a cement company, and they told me, why do I got to pay you $20 an hour when I can get a smaller truck and hire two guys?
I'm glad you bring that up, Al, and I want to ask this to Roger Clayman from the AFL-CIO. Roger, so many folks who look the other way on illegal immigration say this to me. They say, well, they're coming here because they will do jobs that Americans won't do. And my response is, that's a bunch of malarkey. There's never been a job that an American won't do if you pay that American a market value wage for that job. But when you allow people to come in to flood the market illegally, these employers, the ones who are cheating the system, say, hey, why should I pay a guy like Al a decent wage? I can pay these two guys the same amount of money, and they can't complain about it because I'll, make a big deal over their status. Isn't this really hurting us more than it's helping us? Roger, hold on, Al. I want Roger to respond.
Well, I can understand why Al is frustrated and why he feels that we're giving the country away, because we see the erosion of our economy, a lack of growth, a lack of investment. So people who would do the kind of work that he used to do are not finding jobs, and we're not finding the investment to repair our basic infrastructure. Now, I don't relate it back to the immigration question on all counts all the time, but I know one thing, that when you keep wages artificially low, you'll look for people who won't speak up and won't take care of their rights. And so I think that if you in the workplace granted everybody equal rights, at least to be protected for basic minimum wages and labor law, you would find that you'd have to start paying the kind of wages and salaries that would put Americans to work.
Steve, you got a comment? And then
well, yeah. I mean, I agree to a certain point. You can't flood the marketplace with people who are going to, basically artificially reduce wages. However, I would put a lot of this on the companies. We sit there, and you're right, we look the other way in a lot of occasions. As far as I'm concerned, the company that hires an illegal person is just as guilty as the person taking that job. The impact on the economy has to be spread to those people. Somewhere along the line, we're going to have to either enforce that or make them pay the price.
Steve, people often think, how do you solve the illegal immigration problem? You can't possibly deport 11 million people, 20 million people. As I said, listen, there's a very easy way, and you were getting at it with enforcement. There's something called E-Verify, where if the government just required that every employer, not only on a prospective basis, but on a retroactive basis, use that database, and anyone you have working for you must be a match within that database. And if they're not, you cannot employ them. And we're really going to come after you after this, because you can't claim fraud and you were defrauded and this and that. It would solve the problem very, very quickly.
Well, listen, Steve,
I agree with that as well.
Raj, go ahead, and then I'm going to go to Joe in a second.
That should be a piece of the picture. E-Verify that when it's made to work properly, which in the past it is not, and it goes after people who are not undocumented and kicks them off enough jobs and causes discrimination. But why do we turn our back and look the other way, immigrant, non-immigrant, when an employer cheats and doesn't pay the minimum wage, when it withholds wages that workers deserve to have, particularly in the low-wage occupations?
Well, let's see what Joe from Mastic has to say on that or any other issue. Joe, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for joining the show.
Thank you. I actually had two comments about both subjects you were talking about. But as far as schools and taxes go, I think a lot of the times what people overlook is the utility cost to run the school. And I don't understand why we're not looking at our schools and saying, why aren't we putting solar panels up on the roof? Why aren't we doing something else with other alternative energies to bring down the cost of utility?
I can tell you, Joe, a lot of the schools are doing that. I see you're from Mastic. I know William Floyd actually has embarked upon a program. There are a number of these contractors out there who will now put up solar and do complete retrofitting, where it used to be you had to lay out money as an employer and you'd take 5 years and you'd finally get it back. Now with solar, you can put up the solar, the company will pay for it, and you get a rental for it. I don't know if you ever drove by the Dennison building in Hauppauge. We have the carports that I put up. On top of all those carports is solar. We didn't invest a dime of your taxpayer money. The private sector put it up and paid us $8 million over 20 years. So it definitely is starting to happen now throughout the county. Thanks for the call, Joe. We've are going to go back to Steve Flanagan, who I know wanted to give a quick comment on wrapping it up with the DREAM Act and the illegal immigration. Then I want to get into income inequality and
Right.
Obamacare.
The one thing the previous caller brought up an issue. I think what he was trying to get to was zero-based budgeting, which is a lot of the problems we have. I think the use it or lose it mentality. It exists everywhere, and there have been a lot of places where I know we did it in the school district when I was on a school board. We did zero-based budgeting because a lot of people on the board, a lot of people in the community, they sit there and say, well, we have this item in this particular line, this line item. We spent X number of dollars last year, and we're going to spend X number of dollars this year plus. And every time you ask the superintendent, every time you ask those people how much money was actually spent, they sit there and they got to scratch their head and go through a bunch of books. I think one of the things that that gentleman was trying, I think it was Anthony who called before, I think he was really alluding to zero-based budgeting. I think it's something that we need to do at the municipal level, at the school level, and actually I think the federal government level. Somewhere along the line you need to justify every expense, not just a baseline of last year's expenditures.
All right. Well, listen, we've got Ken on the line. Ken, what's on your mind? Ken, can you hear us? One more time for Ken. If you're listening on your radio, Ken, you got to shut it down. Are you with us, Ken?
I'm with you.
Here we go. What's on your mind, Ken?
Well, I just wanted to let you know that a number of small business groups are working on a problem that is just getting away from us, which, as you know, is the cost of group health insurance. And the Long Island Association, the Long Island Advancement of Small Business, has actually been championing the thing I've been trying to get going for years, which is I'd like small businesses, especially I'm talking under 50 employees, who are paying 30 to 40% higher in the community-rated plans, because that's what it is, under 50 employees. If you're a member of a trade association, that we should be able to be counted, those members, all those employees, as a large group, it would save 35 to 40%.
So you're saying, Ken, you're a small business person on Long Island, but unlike a larger business that can pool themselves with other large businesses to get discounted medical rates, health rates for their employees, you can't do it with a smaller. How big is your business, Ken?
Well, we've got about 35 employees, of which maybe 20 are in our group health insurance plan. So if you're under 50, you're regulated into the New York community-rated plans, very high rates compared to a larger company, which in their cases, let's say you have 300-400 employees, they're just looking at those employees as a group and what the experience rating of that group is.
So the big boys
has been like
are getting these major
Obamacare
discounts, and the smaller companies aren't. Raj, you're saying yes and no here. Now, it does. I want to segue here into Obamacare, and is it going to be a good thing or bad thing for your membership in the unions? At first, the unions were all over Obamacare. This is great, they were rallying to get it through. Then there was a big about face when they started to find out, hey, we're going to get screwed on this. Where are the unions right now, and what do you think of Ken's suggestion to allow these smaller businesses to pool?
Well, the pooling will come through the exchange as they go forward. But I mean, I think that the fact is that the changes are not so dramatic in New York because we had community rating, which was an advantage to the smaller employer. Yeah, I'm not certain that if you had 300 people as a one group and you're buying insurance that your rates are going to be so great compared to those who are community rated, where it's leveled off across the entire group. And that's sort of the concept you try to get at by creating a large insurance pool. Now, the advantages, there's a couple of problems with Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, is the problem with moving employees into part-time status. That should not have been able to take place, and it needs correction.
But wait a minute. I saw this thing that flipped my lid the other day, where for the first time ever, an administration is telling businesses, you cannot reduce the number of people in your employment as to get around the threshold for Obamacare. Who the heck is the federal government to tell a business how many people you can employ? Businesses have always had the flexibility to adjust to new regulations. Steve, what's your thoughts on this? Then I want to get it back to Ken and maybe to
well,
it's
it's at the core of the problem with Obamacare. You're sitting here and having a federal government bureaucrat someplace in Washington micromanage businesses of every size. There's a different set of regulations for small businesses, micro businesses, large businesses. The labor unions are going nuts at the national level here, trying to say we got to get out of this thing. Just a headline alone just the other day. You got Hoffa from the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. You got Hansen from the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. Sitting here and saying that Obamacare is going to shatter our health care benefits and cause the nightmare scenarios. And we all know what those nightmare scenarios are. What really gets me is, when we were going through this whole debate in 2009, I remember we always ran into the union guys. We had a rally out in Hicksville one time. The SEIU was out there. We're going to get 1,000 people, and we're in favor of Obamacare. Our people were there. We had hundreds of people there. And all we asked these guys is, what are you doing to yourselves? You have Cadillac health insurance coverage. Teachers have Cadillac health insurance coverage. Most of these people in the large labor unions have Cadillac coverage. You don't see that when the government takes over, you're going to lose these benefits, and it's happening. It's happening right now, and I really would love to get your point of view. As far Roger, as far as you say you want to fix it. I just don't see how you can fix it if you're going to exempt, half of the working population, because then you blow your demographics out.
Well, that's not the way we would propose to fix it.
I propose that you wouldn't.
Give me a quick 30-second answer, Roger. I want to get to Chrissy from Flanders.
None of the labor leaders that you've quoted are proposing to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. They're proposing
they want to be
correct
exempt.
They don't want to be exempt. They want to include the Taft-Hartley funds, which are multi-employer funds, which the businesses and labor both agree should be allowed to provide insurance, particularly for those who are working under 30 hours, and then we should change that 30-hour requirement. I mean, why is that so important? And we don't want to change or get rid of the act, because what would happen then to all those people who are the young people who could stay on their parents' health care until they're 26? Mm-hmm. What about all the people who had lifetime health care limits and couldn't get cancer treatment? And what about the others who just were not accepted into the insurance plan because they were considered an unaffordable risk?
Well, this debate is going to continue, and Ken, I hope. Thanks for bringing up this point. We'll see where it goes down the road with the potential for this consortium of smaller businesses. Chrissy's been holding for quite a while. Thanks for your patience. Chrissy from Flanders. Are you still with us, Chrissy?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I can. You waited so long, but we only have a minute, Chrissy. What's on your mind?
Oh, dang. Okay, I'm just going to go through my list. I was on a school board for 6 years.
Right.
Tried to push for zero-based budgeting. Nobody wanted to hear it. Contracts. Our job as school board members is to define the contracts. We cannot give in, okay?
Hey, personnel is 70% of your budget, is it not?
It's absurd. It is absurd. The waste is unbelievable, and nobody wants to talk about it. The other thing is all municipalities should have some type of retrofitting like you did, and they did over here in Riverhead at the county center for solar. okay? In Riverhead, we had a big building project going on, okay? Now, we had 27 acres of property, okay, that we decided.
Chris, I got to cut you short. I got about 10 seconds for you. Last point.
Okay, well, we need more of that, and as far as insurance is concerned, get rid of it. They should have kept the way it was and just added the benefits of the age limit for the kids, and they should have said, no, you cannot disallow anybody to have insurance.
All right, thanks, Chrissy, for calling. We've got to have another show, guys, just on the Affordable Health Care Act. There's nothing that lights up the phones as much as illegal immigration as the Affordable Care Act. So, hey.
We've spent the whole time on your hot button issues, and you steered us away from the major problems in America.
We
of
went with the
inequality.
flow. Went with the flow. It was the DREAM Act. It was in the news this week. What can I say? Hey, Raj, thank you so much for being a good sport and getting down here today. Steve Flanagan from the CSA, not the CSA, Conservative Society for Action. And you, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for making this such an interesting show. We'll see you next week as well. Bye.